I'm going to turn now to how we think about skills, because I've been talking in very broad generalities about what skills are. And then I'm going to talk about how skills relate to public policy, the choices and things that our politicians and policymakers make on our behalf to make our lives better. We're going to start with the skill pyramid that defines what skills are. So we see at the bottom of this pyramid a set of skills that everyone will be familiar with: numeracy, speaking and writing, reading, physical motor skills. And these skills are important because they form a foundation. They have an impact on how efficiently we can acquire new skills, and also how efficiently we can apply skills. So the things that are farther up this pyramid, like using computer technology and doing analytical problem solving and working in complex multidisciplinary teams, depend very much on that foundation at the bottom, good old-fashioned literacy and numeracy. The second dimension of this pyramid has to do with what the German cognitive psychologists describe as states of being. The lowest level in this they refer to as practical intelligence. Things that you learned sort of by osmosis early in life and know how to do even though they weren't a function of explicit education. Crystallized intelligences, the metaphor I'd use here is riding a bicycle. Once learned, you can do it. You never have to think about how to do it anymore, and it just occurs naturally. The two highest levels relate to fluid problem solving and creative problem solving. And so these are a set of cognitive skills where you're confronted with new challenges and you're able to deal and solve those problems efficiently. The problem economically for Canada is most of us live in the practical and crystallized world. We use skills we learned a long time ago, and we don't go beyond those skills. To be competitive, our employers need fluid and creative problem solvers who deal with large amounts of information on a daily basis. So we use this framework to describe the demands for literacy skill in the workplace, but we also use the same framework to describe the demand in the general community, in the market for buying goods and services, in our health system, in our democracy, and also to describe demands in the home environment. What it takes, in fact, what does the home require you to read? The notes the teacher sends home for your children, the guidelines and instruction manual for consumer products, whatever the demands are. We use this same framework to describe the supply of skills that people have, so what skills they can bring to meet that demand. Viewed from the individual, our story runs as follows. The world is changing. What demands people face are being changed rapidly by shifts in the organization of society and technological advance, and that's raising, on average, the skill demand. The second layer is there are changes that are associated with the traversing the life course. You graduate from high school, there are changing demands with dealing with post-secondary education. You get a job, you have to learn about that job and do it well. You get sick, you get children. All of these create new demands to use those basic skills that I talked about earlier. And finally, educators know well that people can impose change on themselves. They have goals, they have aspirations, they want to learn something new, they want to get a different job. And so the inevitable part of this are changing skill demands, and generally the move is to higher skill demands. So the policy question is, how do people respond to these demands? The first way they can do it is do what their mom or grandmom taught them, and that's to rely on these practical and crystallized intelligences to solve the problems. Sometimes this works, but if the future is different than the past, it may be completely inappropriate response. The second way that they can cope is to rely on others, and this can be good if the others you're relying on know what they're talking about. But in many cases, the people upon whom people rely most are not very useful informants. The third coping mechanism is to actually avoid. I've been told by my women friends that this is a male way of dealing with the world. Some demand pops up. Maybe it'll go away if we wait long enough. Sometimes it does, but often it doesn't, and you have to then bear the consequences. And then finally, the most efficient and effective coping mechanism is for people to rely on their own fluid and creative cognitive skills, their ability to read, to use numbers, and if they can use those things to solve problems efficiently and effectively, then it creates positive outcomes. And so depending on the mechanism that people use to cope, it creates different outcomes for different people. The people that use the cognitive tools like reading and numeracy get ahead. The people that rely on others generally do less well. And so we see an impact of literacy skill on individuals' outcomes in all sorts of domains. The thing that science didn't realize for a long time, that these individual impacts actually add up and influence the outcomes of our social institutions. How well a school performs, how well a business performs in terms of its profitability, how well our hospitals work, depend on the literacy skills of the people that work in those institutions and the literacy skills of the people with whom they interact, either as clients or patients. And so we have this collective, either positive or negative set of impacts. And even more surprisingly, we've been able to demonstrate that differences in literacy score are actually the single most important determinant of long-term rates of GDP growth, so how much more rapidly wealthy we get with time, to the point where over the past 50 years you see differences have emerged of about $11,000 per person per year in income, and half of that, about $6,500, is directly related back to differences in average literacy skill. We've also identified a level effect where the larger the proportion of low-skilled people, the lower the economic growth rate. So it's like low-skilled workers are dragging down the performance of the economy. So the prescription is raise your average skill levels and you're going to get richer. And the most efficient way of raising the average level is by improving the skills of the least skilled, and the world's going to be economically and socially a much better place. So we use an economic model to bring all of these pieces together, these individual behaviors, with how the world works economically. We have skill demand created by work, the family, and the community, and that gets married with the supply of skill, what we learn from early in life till we die, and the things we forget. And those come together in markets for skill that are more or less efficient. The most obvious market is the labor market. Employers hire their workers because of their skills, and the more skill you have, the more you earn, because the more productive you are, is the economic theory. But we also have reason to believe that our health system works like a market, that people with more skills get access to more health goods and services, which in Canada are largely publicly financed. Those same skilled people get more access to educational opportunity, so they're more likely to go to post-secondary, they're more likely to get adult education and training. And finally, people with higher skill levels get more access to power and influence in the democracy, and that lowers their stress levels and gives them the benefits of power and influence. And if you turn all of this on its head, low-skilled people are the people that absorb most of the disadvantage that's evident in Canadian society and in the economy more generally. So what should government do about literacy or skill problems if they're there? Starting on the right-hand side of this chart, the first and most self-evident thing is they run the factories that create skill. They run the initial education system, the post-secondary system, and foster adult education and training systems so we create more supply. And this has absorbed Canadian public policy makers. We invest more than almost any other country in education on a per capita basis because these skills are fundamentally important to our ability to compete with the world. On the other side, the left-hand side, Canadian public policy does practically nothing on the demand side of the equation. We believe economists and policymakers and politicians of every stripe pretty well think that the market will take care of skill demand and that will be efficient and the world will be a better place and economically efficient. It turns out that our data suggest that this is not the case, that left to its own devices, the market is not very efficient at creating skill demand, so you need policies and programs that serve to raise skill demand because it's only those high-skilled jobs that we're going to keep and that actually pay good wages and provide stable employment. And then the final piece of the puzzle is labor markets are relatively inefficient at matching worker skills with the available jobs. So to do this efficiently, you need tools to identify skill levels, and the credentials offered by our educational institutions are not such good signals of people's skills. So to make those markets work more efficiently, we need to test, offer remedial skill upgrading to people who show that they have lower skills than they need for whatever walk of life they're in, and by better matching, we'll have more efficient economy. So we've been talking in economic terms and in very general terms about what literacy skills are. And now comes the time when I have to dispel the myths. Yes, literacy is about learning to read, the letters of the alphabet. But literacy as we conceive it is a tool that involves using information provided in print to solve problems and to actually use it as a tool to achieve your own ends. And this means that literacy, as we think about it, covers a huge range of skill, from I can't recognize a single letter of the alphabet, up to a skill level where you're solving very complex dynamic problems using information that you draw in from print, to the point that the scale upon which we represent literacy, it runs from 0 to 500. In the most educated population in the world, which Canada has, only 3 or 4% of adults find themselves up top of the 500-point scale. So a huge range of skill, and divide it into 5 proficiency levels. And those 5 proficiency levels are important because they're defined by what it is you need to know in order to solve problems at those levels. And also we can characterize the demand that the labor market creates. So to be a plumber, you need level 3 reading on this scale. To be a nurse, you need level 5, and so on for every occupation in the country. This scale also divides naturally in the middle, about 250 on the scale. Below 250, people are still in the process of learning to read. That means that they haven't mastered the mechanics of reading, so they use more of their effort goes to the act of reading and less of it to building meaning and deciding what to do with the information that you've been able to take in. Above 250, we refer to it as people are now in the process of reading to learn. They're fluid and automatic readers who can apply reading to solve their everyday problems and use this skill as a tool to advance their own interests. So I've also been talking